Infection can start with a simple sneeze. And then a handshake. Perhaps an accidental collision. Then a simple touch on the shoulder. And just like that, you have a patient in trouble.
Yo, listen up, I got a story about a teacher, Mr. Wright, yeah, he's a biology creature. In the classroom, he's spitting knowledge like a preacher. With his lab coat on, he's the lyrical feature. He's got test tubes and beakers mixing up that potion, teaching us about cells and the process of mitosis.
Hi Year 11s, and welcome to the second video for infectious diseases, where we're going to be looking at disease transmission, giving you a little bit of an idea with the opening video before the intro about roughly what to expect in this topic. Before we start, let's have a little bit of a discussion about the different types of ways that disease can be transmitted between organisms. So again, we're focusing purely on infectious diseases for the rest of this topic. We did talk about non-infectious for a little bit last topic, but now it's only infectious diseases. So, organisms can transmit infectious diseases through a number of ways, and we refer to how infectious something is through the term pathogenicity. So pathogenicity is the ability for a pathogen to physically cause infectious disease, and it's going to be dependent on how that pathogen is going to be transmitted. So there's four main ways that we're going to talk about a pathogen being transmitted or passed on from host to host: airborne, vector-borne, contact, and vehicle. And I think pretty much all of those were probably seen in that little opening clip at the beginning of the video. So, talking about airborne pathogens, air is not actually a suitable medium for pathogens to actually grow in. So if the pathogens enter the air, they're not going to grow, they're just going to stay there until essentially they die or they're passed on to another host. Which means we're not naturally finding pathogens in the air. They're only getting into the air when they're physically forced into the air from soils, food, water, plants, or animals. Best example, obviously, is with a cough. So any fluid droplets that are forced out through speaking or coughing or sneezing, they're forced out from the respiratory tract of the host into the air, where they're propelled through that air. Those droplets can travel a long distance and they can remain airborne for days. They can also become attached to dust particles and travel even further, but then it just takes someone to come into contact with one of those pathogens in the air, and that disease can be passed on, the infectious disease can be passed on. Vector-borne, on the other hand, these are passed on through living transmitters. So vectors are essentially a living transmitter of a pathogen that doesn't actually suffer the disease, they just carry the disease. Most of the time these are going to be arthropods and vertebrates. As you can see in the image over here, we have a mosquito potentially being a vector for malaria. Now, vector-borne transmission can either be external or internal. So external transmission is going to be when the pathogen is on the surface of the body. So thinking of maybe like if you're patting a wild animal, potentially thinking of what disease or what pathogens are on that exterior body that are then passing onto your hand, which then you may move on and eat or breathe, etc. And then that pathogen gets passed on to you. Whereas internal transmission, that means the pathogen is actually stored inside the animal itself, so you need to be bitten or exchange bodily fluids with that organism in order for that pathogen to be passed on to you. Obviously, we also have contact, which is an obvious form of passing on a pathogen. This is generally through direct or indirect contact, direct contact being touching, kissing, or sexual contact, whereas indirect contact might be through a non-living object such as sharing forks, sharing straws, etc., or even sharing clothing. The pathogen moves from one host onto that vehicle, onto the object, and is then transferred to the new host once that person uses that same utensil or clothing. And obviously, touching, kissing, or sexual contact, you're going to physically be passing the pathogen from one host to another. Lastly, we're going to be looking at vehicles. This is a very small PowerPoint this week. Vehicles are the non-living objects that can carry pathogens. So, the vehicle is non-biological, So the pathogen can't live on that object. It can only be carried from host to host. If one of these vehicles is physically carrying a infectious pathogen at the time we're looking at it, then we call it a fomite. So common fomites include clothes, utensils, furniture, and needles. There is a little behind the news video that we will look on in class. This can be found on the ABC. It's not going to be found on Doing Science Right, just for copyright reasons, but there's a good behind the news video there talking about mobile phones, and that's been filmed at UniSA, where we will also be doing our experiment later on in the term, so you will get to see some of the people in that video actually working with us later this term.